A Central Ohio cold case is getting national attention this weekend.
This is truly one of the biggest mysteries of Central Ohio.
27-year-old has his life in front of him, might be getting married, going to be a doctor, and he disappears without a trace.
Brian Schaffer was a man with a future so bright it was almost cinematic. At 27 years old, he was a second-year medical student at Ohio State University. A grueling, prestigious path that demands everything from a person. To those who knew him, Brian wasn't just capable, he was vibrant. He loved the music of Pearl Jam. He dreamed of moving to a tropical island, and he had a smile that suggested he knew a joke he wasn't quite ready to share yet. But there was a shadow over Brian's spring of 2006. Only 3 weeks prior to our story, Brian had lost his mother, Renee, to cancer. He was grieving, yet resilient. He was planning a trip to Miami with his girlfriend, Alexis, where many believed he was finally going to propose. To the outside world, Brian was a man moving forward. To those closest to him, he was a man holding a heavy weight, looking for a moment of relief. He had everything to live for, which is why what happened on the night of March 31st doesn't just defy explanation, it defies human nature. It was Friday, the start of spring break. The air in Columbus was beginning to shed the winter chill, and the university district was teeming with students ready to forget their exams. At 9 p.m., Brian meets his father, Randy Schaffer, for dinner. Randy notices Brian seems exhausted from pulling all-nighters, but he's in good spirits. At 10 p.m., the night begins in earnest. Brian meets his friend Clint Florence at the Ugly Tuna Saloona. The atmosphere is loud, the music is heavy, the drinks are flowing. Between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., the group begins a bar crawl through the short north area. Eventually, they decide to head back to where it all started, the Ugly Tuna. At 1:15 a.m., security footage captures the trio ascending the escalator. Brian is wearing an olive green shirt over a white long-sleeve tee. He looks relaxed. He enters the bar. Then, at 1:50 a.m., in a final haunting frame of film, Brian is spotted just outside the bar entrance on CCTV. He is talking to two young women, a casual, brief conversation. He appears to say goodbye, turns, and walks back into the bar. This is the last time Brian Schaffer is ever seen. By 2 a.m., last call, the lights flicker on, revealing the sticky floors and empty glasses. The crowd thins. Brian's friends wait by the exit, watching the stream of people descend the escalator. By 2:15, the bar is empty. The staff begins to flip chairs. Brian is not there. Here is where the case transitions from a missing person mystery to a physical impossibility. Detectives began with a simple premise. People do not just evaporate. The Ugly Tuna Saloona was located on the second floor of a building. To leave, patrons had to use the same escalator they arrived on, which was monitored by a fixed CCTV camera. There was one other exit, a service door used by staff that led to a construction site. Investigators reviewed the footage from that night frame by frame. They didn't just look for Brian, they looked for anyone who resembled him. They counted every single person who entered the bar, and they counted every single person who left. The math didn't add up. Every person who entered was accounted for on the exit footage, except for Brian. If he left via the escalator, the camera missed him. If he left via the service door, he walked into a high-risk construction zone. To navigate that area in the dark while intoxicated, and then bypass every other street-level camera in the university district, would require a level of stealth that seemed impossible. When the facts refuse to settle, theories rush in to fill the vacuum. Some believe Brian changed his appearance, perhaps donning a hat or a jacket, and walked out among a large group. In the low-resolution footage of 2006, a subtle change in silhouette could be enough to mask his identity. But why? If he left voluntarily, why never look back? Then there is the darker possibility. At the time, a chilling theory was gaining traction across the Midwest. The smiley face killers. This theory suggests a coordinated group was targeting high-achieving young men near bodies of water. While Columbus isn't far from the Olentangy River, this theory remains controversial. Yet it provides a terrifying framework for how a man could vanish from a crowd without a trace. Perhaps the most disturbing theory is that Brian never actually made it out of the building. The complex was under heavy construction. Some speculate that Brian, disoriented, entered the construction zone and suffered a fatal accident, falling into an open shaft, or being accidentally sealed behind a wall or under a concrete pour scheduled for the following morning. If he was never seen leaving, it's because he's still there. The mystery didn't end at the bar. For months, Brian's girlfriend, Alexis, called his phone every night just to hear his voice. But 6 months after he vanished, the phone actually rang. 3 times. Wireless providers tracked the ping to a tower in Hilliard, Ohio, 14 miles away. Was it a glitch in the aging cellular network, or was Brian Schaffer somewhere in the suburbs, charging a phone he wasn't supposed to have, watching the world look for him? The impact on the Schaffer family was nothing short of Shakespearean. 2 years after Brian vanished, his father, Randy, was killed in a freak accident when a tree limb fell on him during a storm. In Randy's obituary guest book, an entry appeared, "To Dad, love, Brian, U.S. Virgin Islands." The police tracked the IP address to a public library. It was a hoax, a cruel prank played by someone in a void where empathy should be. Today, Brian's younger brother, Derek, is the sole surviving member of the family, left to carry the weight of a mystery that has no ending. Did Brian Schaffer walk out of that bar in a disguise, or did he never leave the building at all? Brian Schaffer vanished from a room with no exits, leaving behind a trail of digital ghosts and a silent cell phone. It is a case, defined by a lack of sound, but our next case is defined by the exact opposite. Imagine you are on the phone with your son. You are guiding him home through the darkness of a rural landscape. You are his lifeline, and then, in the middle of a sentence, he utters 3 final, panicked words, and the line goes dead. When we return, we look at the disappearance of Brandon Swanson and the mystery of a man who was heard but never found. Before we continue, please take a moment to hit the share button. In cold cases, the greatest enemy isn't time, it's silence. By sharing this video, you are putting these names back into the public consciousness. You might be the reason a new lead finally comes forward. Let's keep searching. Brandon Swanson was a young man who understood the layout of his world. He was 19, a student at Minnesota West Community and Technical College, a typical college kid with a future that stretched out before him like the long, flat, highway grids of the American Midwest. On the night of May 14, 2008, he was celebrating. The semester was over. He was heading home to his parents in Marshall, Minnesota. But Brandon wasn't a risk-taker. He wasn't reckless. He was a communicator. When his Chevy Lumina slid off the road and high-centered in a ditch, he didn't panic. He did what any son would do. He picked up his cell phone, and he called his parents. He told them exactly where he thought he was. He stayed on the line. He was a voice in the dark, a digital tether to safety. But in the rural expanse of Lyon County, safety is an illusion of distance. The timeline of Brandon's disappearance is a harrowing, minute-by-minute descent into the unknown. It begins at 1:15 a.m. Brandon leaves the town of Canby, driving east. At 1:54 a.m., the first call connects. Brandon tells his parents, Brian and Annette, that he's stuck. He tells them he is near the town of Lind, just a few miles from home. For parents in rural Minnesota, this is a minor inconvenience. A routine retrieval. Brian and Annette get in their car and drive toward the location their son described. At 2:10 a.m., the nightmare of the Gap begins. Brian and Annette arrive at the spot Brandon described. They flash their lights, they honk their horn. They are still on the phone with Brandon, but he says he can't see them. He tells them, I'm flashing my lights right now, can't you see me? But there is only darkness. They are on the phone together, frustrated, confused, but not yet afraid. They assume they are just a mile or two off. They don't realize that they are looking for a ghost in the wrong county. For the next hour, Father and son remain locked in a digital embrace. At 2:20 a.m., Brandon decides he can't wait in the car. He thinks he sees the distant, flickering lights of a town on the horizon. He tells his father he's going to walk toward that glow. He stays on the line with Brian. For 47 minutes, they talk. They discuss the terrain. Brandon describes climbing over fences, walking through gravel, moving through fields of young corn. He mentions the sound of running water nearby. They are close, so close they feel they should be able to hear each other's actual voices over the prairie wind. Then, at 3:10 a.m., the world breaks. Suddenly, Brandon interrupts the conversation. There is no lead-up, no explanation. He yells, "Oh! Shh!" And the line goes dead. Brian calls back, once, twice, 10 times, over and over. The ringing echoes into a voicemail that will never be checked. The silence of the Minnesota plains had swallowed his son's voice, leaving only the static of a disconnected signal. When the sun rose, the investigation revealed a terrifying discrepancy, a flaw in the map of reality. Brandon wasn't near Lind. He wasn't even close. Cell tower pings, those invisible breadcrumbs of the modern age, placed his phone near the tiny town of Taunton. Brandon was 25 miles away from where he thought he was. He wasn't in Lyon County. He was in Lincoln County, heading into the heart of Yellow Medicine County. He was lost in a landscape he thought he knew, walking toward lights that may have been nothing more than stars on the horizon or distant farmyards. Police found his Chevy Lumina exactly where the pings suggested, high-centered on the edge of a field. There was no blood. There was no sign of a struggle. There was no evidence of foul play. But there was also no Brandon. The car was abandoned, a silent monument to a man who had simply walked away into a 47-minute conversation and never walked back. When the search began in earnest, the sheer scale of the Minnesota landscape became the primary adversary. This wasn't a forest where a man could be obscured by trees. This was the open prairie. It was supposed to be a place where you could see for miles, but at night, on the ground, those fields become a labyrinth of tall grass, drainage ditches, and deceptive horizons. The most prominent theory, the one held by many investigators, is known as the river theory. During the search, bloodhounds were brought in to catch a scent from the abandoned Chevy Lumina. One dog followed a trail for nearly 3 miles, leading directly to the banks of the river. According to the handlers, the dog didn't just stop at the water's edge. It jumped in, it swam, it signaled that the scent continued into the current. On the surface, it seems like a closed case, an accidental drowning. But the Yellow Medicine River, on that night, was not a raging torrent. In most places, it was only knee-deep. The current was steady, but not overwhelming. Brandon was a fit young man, and while the water was cold, the river was narrow enough in many sections that a person could simply wade across. For weeks, then months, teams of divers, side-scan sonar, and state-of-the-art recovery equipment combed every inch of that riverbed. They searched for miles downstream. They looked for clothing, for shoes, for anything caught on a submerged branch. They found nothing. Not a single trace of Brandon Swanson has ever been recovered from those waters. This leads us to one of the most haunting forensic curiosities of the case: Brandon's glasses. Brandon was legally blind in one eye. He required his glasses to navigate even the most familiar environments, in the pitch blackness of a rural field, with no moonlight to guide him. His glasses were his only hope of distinguishing a solid path from a steep drop-off. If he fell, if he tripped into the water, his glasses likely would have been the first thing to fly off his face. Searchers spent hundreds of man-hours on their hands and knees, literally sifting through the dirt and grass in the area where the scent ended. They were looking for that small glint of wire and glass. They never found them. And then, there are the sinkholes. Rural Minnesota is dotted with old, forgotten farm infrastructure. Some believe that Brandon, walking blindly through the fields, stepped into one of these unmarked fissures. If the hole was deep enough, and the soil above it collapsed, he would have been buried instantly. It would explain the suddenness of his final words. It would explain why infrared cameras and aerial searches found no heat signature. He wasn't on the surface, he was beneath it. But searchers didn't just look with their eyes, they used heavy machinery. They used ground-penetrating radar. They checked every known well and cistern in the county. Every lead ended in a graveyard of dry earth. The Swanson family has had to live in that silence for nearly 2 decades. Annette and Brian Swanson turned that frustration into a legacy. They fought for Brandon's Law, a piece of legislation that changed the way authorities handle missing persons in Minnesota. It removed the waiting period for adults, ensuring that when a voice goes silent, the search starts immediately. But even with the law behind them, the question remains: how does a man on the phone with his father vanish from the middle of an open field and leave absolutely nothing behind? Brandon Swanson vanished while his father was literally listening to him. A tragedy of distance and darkness. But our final case takes us out of the lonely fields and into the most secure environment imaginable: a public school, a place of bright fluorescent lights, buzzing classrooms, and a sea of parents and teachers. How does a 7-year-old boy wearing a bright red shirt walk down a hallway toward his classroom and simply cease to exist? Next, we examine the disappearance of Kyron Horman, a case where the evidence isn't hidden in a field, but perhaps in plain sight. June 4th, 2010, Skyliner Elementary School in Portland, Oregon, was alive with the kind of frantic, happy energy that only exists on the last few days of the school year. It was the day of the science fair. The hallways were a maze of poster boards, dioramas, and excited children. Parents moved in a steady stream through the corridors. In an environment like this, we assume our children are invisible to danger because they are surrounded by so many eyes. Among the crowd was 7-year-old Kyron Horman. Kyron was a boy who loved the world of science, a sweet and exceptionally shy child who wore his glasses like a badge of curiosity. That morning, he was beaming. He had worked for weeks on his project about the red-eyed tree frog. In the last photo ever taken of him, he is standing in the school hallway, glowing with the innocent satisfaction of a job well done. He's wearing a bright red CSI t-shirt. He's smiling a wide, gap-toothed grin. Minutes later, that hallway became the site of one of the most baffling vanishments in American history. Kyron didn't wander into the woods. He didn't get lost in the dark. He disappeared from the heart of a safe zone at 8:45 in the morning, surrounded by people who were supposed to be watching. The timeline of Kyron's disappearance is measured in minutes and massive, catastrophic failures in communication. At 8 a.m., Kyron arrives at school with his stepmother, Terry Moulton Horman. They walk together to his classroom, but they look at the other projects. They take that final, haunting photo. At 8:45 a.m., Terry tells investigators she watched Kyron walk down the hallway toward his first class. She says she waved goodbye as he turned the corner, his red shirt disappearing into the flow of other students. This is the vanishing point. At 9 a.m., the school day officially begins. But here, the first domino falls. Kyron's teacher, believing he is at a doctor's appointment based on a misunderstanding or a misfiled note, marks him absent. Because of this, no one looks for him. No one calls home. The school assumes he is with his parents. The parents assume he is in class. For 7 hours, Kyron Horman is a ghost. At 3:30 p.m., the school bus arrives at Kyron's stop. His father, Caney, and his stepmother, Terry, are waiting. The doors open. Children spill out onto the pavement, but Kyron is not among them. By 3:45, the panic has set in. Caney and Terry call the school, and the horrifying reality is revealed. Kyron hasn't been seen since he turned that corner in the hallway, nearly 8 hours ago. Unlike our previous cases, The investigation into Kyron didn't look toward the horizon. It turned inward almost immediately. There was no evidence of a stranger on campus, no broken windows, no sightings of a child being led away by force. The school was a closed loop, and so the police began to look at the people who were there. The focus narrowed sharply on Terry Horman. Investigators began a forensic audit of her movements between 9 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. Terry claimed she spent those hours driving her young daughter around to soothe an earache. But when the cell tower pings came back, the story began to fracture. Forensic analysis suggested her phone was pinging off towers in a remote, heavily wooded area of northwest Portland, a location that did not align with her shopping trip. These digital footprints suggested a different path, a more secluded route through the rural hills. Then, the leaks began. Rumors swirled that Terry had failed multiple polygraph tests. Even more chilling, a landscaper later came forward alleging that months before Kyron disappeared, Terry had approached him with a plot to kill her husband, Horman. While these elements paint a dark, psychological profile, they provided no physical evidence, no blood, no struggle, and most importantly, no Kyron. Search teams, the FBI, and thousands of volunteers descended on the wooded hills of northwest Portland. They used infrared technology. They used cadaver dogs. They combed through the thick underbrush, searching for any trace of a red t-shirt or a pair of glasses. They found nothing. The white truck lid, a report of a vehicle parked near the school's secondary entrance, went cold. The massive search of the surrounding ravines came up empty. It was as if the school hallway hadn't led to a classroom, but to another dimension entirely. The impact on the Horman family was a slow-motion collapse. Kyron's biological mother, Desiree Young, has spent the last 15 years in a relentless, exhausting pursuit of the truth. She has stood before countless microphones, pointing the finger at the stepmother, while the legal system remains at a standstill. Without a body, and without a confession, there is no smoking gun. The Skyline Elementary community was changed forever. The open school environment, where parents could wander the halls and celebrate science fairs, died that day, but the mystery remains. Did Kyron leave that school in a vehicle? Was he taken by someone he knew? Someone he trusted enough to walk with? Or did he slip out a side door, only to be swallowed by the vast Oregon wilderness? In the case of Kyron Horman, the evidence isn't hidden in a field 20 miles away, or locked behind a CCTV glitch. It is hidden in the silence of those who were there. It is hidden in the gap between a morning wave and an afternoon bus that never arrived. We have looked at 3 men, 3 families, and 3 versions of the impossible. In the case of Brian Schaffer, we are haunted by the physicality of the mystery. In the case of Brandon Swanson, we are haunted by the distance. And in the case of Kyron Horman, we are haunted by the betrayal of safety. What connects these 3 stories isn't just the lack of a body or the absence of a crime scene. It is the echo. It is the phone that rings 6 months later in Hilliard. The OS that still rings in a father's ears in Minnesota. And the CSI t-shirt that remains a vibrant, painful red in a mother's memory in Oregon. Until a door is opened, until a field is turned, or until a silence is finally broken. These names remain etched into the public consciousness. Brian, Brandon, Kyron. They are the men, and the boys who never left. If you've made it this far, it's because you believe, as I do, that no one should simply vanish. In every cold case, there is a person out there who knows one small piece of the puzzle. Please, take a moment to share this video. By hitting that share button, you are keeping their stories alive. You are ensuring that their names and their faces don't fade into the static of history. If you have information regarding any of these cases, I have provided the official tip line links in the description below. You can remain anonymous. Don't forget to subscribe as we continue to investigate the cases that defy logic and the mysteries that refuse to stay buried. Thank you for watching, and thank you for helping us. Keep searching.